Good afternoon. Welcome to the tea table. I'm so happy you have joined me today. And we are on a warmer day, a little bit, but we're not quite out of winter yet. But I thought I would wear magenta today because it's such a nice kind of in between winter, end of winter, looking to spring. And I love the color magenta. And it's really a mix of course, red and blue, which makes purple. But then there's a touch of, I think there's a touch of maybe yellow in it that brings it a brighter than just a purple. I don't know. I have to look at the color wheel. But if you haven't gotten your tea yet, please pause and get your tea, and I will be waiting for you. Well, I have tulips. Now, these tulips are so amazing. They have been on my front porch since the end of January. They're just now beginning to open. I think they are a miracle because I've enjoyed them all this time and they'll probably last a few more weeks. And tulips, we've talked about that. They're the promise of spring. They're one of the earliest flowers. And I have in my earrings little pink daisies. Now, they're not out yet, but I thought we are looking forward to that. Yes. Well, I have made you a rather magenta pink tea tray today. And I have a very special teapot that is English Royal Albert Lady Carlisle. And I looked it up, and she is a most popular pattern that was invented by Royal Albert 1944, right at the end of World War II. And of course, English. And on China, you will often have varied tones of pink. Now this Lady Carlisle is a nice rich pink, almost a magenta, I thought. And then I wanted to show you a special plate. This was my mother's, and it was always my favorite plate in her china closet. And it was a one and only. I'm going to read what I've never really read what it is. And it is, wow, hard to read. I think it looks British. It has a lion on it. Anyway, I love the silhouette and it looks to me like the era of George Washington. And so many patterns of china have that because I know why. The 1700s was such an era of absolute beautiful clothing. So complicated, so involved. The women's and the men's, if you analyze what they're wearing. And so I thought I'm going to bring this little plate and put my Lady Carlisle on it. And then I have 1 cup of Lady Carlisle. If you are thrifters, you should keep your eyes out for this because this is a very special pattern. And it's harder to find because people love this bright. People love the bright magenta pink. Well, let's pour out. I like you to see the steam if possible. And I have a very special picture. George Washington. And he's wearing magenta. Who would believe it? And on the back, it says Mount Vernon. And everything I'm using except that plate was thrifted over the years. Here's Martha is the sugar bowl, and she has touches of magenta also. You know, once you start looking for a color, it seems like the color pops out. It just pops out. That is delicious tea. Well, I was looking through my house for a treat. I don't have many treats right now. Oh, and I have this special napkin. I like the pink napkin with the rose, the cabbage rose flower. It's always nice. I went searching for a treat. I thought, I have to have a treat for my tea people. I thought, could there possibly be, back in my pantry, I have a special box. And it is from Bavaria, Germany. And I've had this for many years. Years ago, somebody would have ordered. It's Nuremberg. And it is a tin, and it has all the different costumes of the people. Somebody ordered cookies years ago. Well, what I do when I buy Christmas cookies, so I buy the Lebkuchen, because I have found it difficult to bake that. I want you to see all these costumes. They're so beautiful. And then on the cover, every one is different. Every little village and town in Germany, just like in Norway and Sweden and Denmark and Holland and France and Switzerland and Austria, they'll all have their own ethnic costume, just a little different than the next village. So much individuality. I love it. Creative, not everything the same. No, God made everything unique and colorful and different. And when people are given a chance, they will be so creative. It is incredible. I've observed it. I've experienced it. Well, I found some Lebkuchen that were left from Christmas hiding in the box. Lebkuchen is a wonderful spicy gingerbread that is made in Nuremberg, and they sell them here. I tried to make them homemade once. Very challenging. They put the cookie dough on a little wafer, just like a communion wafer. You can buy them at the German store. And then there's orange peeling and about 8 different spices and crumbled up nuts, and then a glaze goes over the top. So it's complex. But if you can ever make them homemade, they are fabulous. And then I just put a few little chocolate chip cookies I found up in the cupboard. So there's your treat. Please enjoy. These are nice with tea. Very light, almost spongy in their texture. They're not a heavy, greasy gingerbread. They're more light. And I like them, but I'm not really, I had a few this Christmas, and I'm not really quite desiring them at this point, but they're wonderful once a year to have. Well, I told you last week I was going to tell you something special about glasses. Now, I have never been to an eye doctor in my entire life. I didn't have any need of glasses. And then after we all got our cell phones, well, I started needing readers, and then I got a little stronger, start at 125 and go 150 and then 175. Whoa, all of a sudden 200. And then things were just getting a tiny bit blurry far away. And I thought, oh my goodness. And it's true, it's from the cell phones. Well, so I went with my husband and had an exam. He had his, and she gave me a prescription. And here they are. Do you like them? They are very comfortable on. They're nice. They're tortoise shell. And above, I see far away. And then if I look down, I see close up. But I'm getting used to them. I'm not used to them yet. So I'm going to take them off. But I've talked to other people who have had this kind, and they said it takes a little adjustment, but once you get used to it, you'll really like them. So that's what I'm hoping for. They're very good quality, very nice glasses. So I wanted to share that with all of you, because eventually I'll put them on for the tea talk. But I have several things I really wanted to give honor to George Washington today. And I think I've talked about this before, and I finally looked it up, and it's true. And before 1971, all of the school children in most states had 2 holidays in February. Washington's birthday on the 22nd and Abe Lincoln's on the 12th. Now, we being Washington State especially got to have that. And I remember the teachers in school, we had a whole month of learning about Abraham Lincoln and his integrity and chopping wood and how hard he worked, and his education was limited, but he read and he educated himself. And then we would learn about George Washington and the cherry tree, and that he never told a lie. And this was just such a beautiful study and so ingrained in us. And to learn the great quotes of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and to be able to take in their character, because I've always heard it said, and this is particularly true when you're raising children, you want to have 2 goals: skills and character. Character and skills, skills and character. Well, that is what George Washington had. He was very skilled. And he was a humble man, but very willing to do anything for his country. And it's the same with Abraham Lincoln. You know, Abraham Lincoln really suffered. And then, of course, sadly, he was assassinated. But Abraham Lincoln was and he had everything coming against him in the Civil War. But he kept a good sense of humor, and that is the survival. And George Washington and Martha, he had a good wife, Martha. George Washington didn't really have any children of his own, but when he married Martha, she was a widow, and she had 2 children. And so he was father to them. And they lived at Mount Vernon, and he loved Mount Vernon. He was happy to be at Mount Vernon. And we must remember that the capital was not in Washington, D.C. during George Washington's life. It was in New York. In fact, it was very near where 9/11 actually happened. That was the President's Church that survived the 9/11 attack in New York. But I just remembered something. What I put the cookies on was a little plate, and it looks like George and Martha together. And I thought that was so sweet. There have been so many things in the China realm done for George and Martha. And I think it's because they were so really British in their customs. Remember, these are British, they were British subjects until the American Revolution. And tea was very important. And they had formal parties, formal dancing. They did the minuet. You know, we're talking 1776, 1770s. And George Washington survived the war, but he suffered in the war, just like Abraham Lincoln. Often there are very hard times people go through, but they keep going and they don't give up, and they keep going and they don't give up, and they finally win. And I think that's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful character quality. And I heard it said, what we need is really caring. And caring is truly part of character, that we don't just care for ourselves, but we love our neighbor as ourselves. We love God first, and then we love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, last week, Saturday, I was at my school. I teach my Kenyans, and I am teaching, I think I've told you, a class on the history of worship, going back to Adam to today. And so we've had a wonderful time. I love my Kenyans. They are so profound, and they ask the deepest questions. They're very, very thoughtful and devout. Well, at the first part of the class, this Benson, actually he's my TA, he said, "Dr. Suzanne, we want to interview you right after class, right after." And I guess they had sent me questions, but they sent it to the wrong email. I didn't have any prep time whatsoever. They've developed their own TV station, and it's called Pacific Waves. Well, so I went for the interview, and they asked me really complex questions about church history, and it was fun. Anyway, if you want to see it, I looked it up today. It's on the school website. The school's name is Fulbright, just full and bright, Fulbright Theological Seminary, Lakewood, Washington. And if you go to the home page, they'll have these videos that you can see that it says Pacific Waves. And this is the fourth one they've done. So it's the most recent one. They'll do another one on Saturday with another professor. So anyway, it was really interesting, and I got to answer a lot of interesting questions, and I can't remember them all now, but they were regarding church history and history of worship. And I know one of my answers was, and I feel this so deeply and so strongly, how do you get a great man like Abraham Lincoln? How do you get a great man like George Washington? That is, from a historical perspective, we have to look. You have the beginnings. You have 4,000 years from Adam to Christ. Okay, basically 4,000 years. That's Old Testament. Then you have Christ, and he, 30 AD, 33 AD, he dies, and then he is resurrected and goes to heaven. That's the beginning of the church. So from that moment to today is approximately a little about 2,000 years. And so we're talking, when we look at history and we say, I look at a big picture. I have drawn a tree. I think I've told you I need to bring it on and show you. And if any of you want it, I'll give it to you. Just ask me for it. I can email it to you and you can make a copy. But it makes it so easy because I divided history from Christ to today in 10 parts. And I was thinking, how do we get George Washington? You have to go. We have 300 years called the early church. Well, first I start with the seed is Christ, okay? The tree has to have a seed. That's the beginning. 300 years is the roots. That's from Christ to Constantine, 325, Council of Nicaea, and in 309, it became legal and you could worship. Before that, during that 300 years, there was a lot of persecution. And so finally, 309, Constantine becomes a Christian and he makes an Edict of Milan, freedom for all to worship. Then in 325, he calls Nicene Council, and that was for the purpose of, there were a lot of heresies. In the early church, you had the battle from without, which was persecution, but within you had false doctrine would creep up. And so they had to have a council and make decisions, and that's where the creeds come from. You know, the Apostles' Creed, the Athanasian Creed, the Nicene Creed. Creed means credo in Latin, I believe. It's just statements. And when you're in church and you say the creed, it's like, I believe in God, the Father, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, and it goes down. So that's what you are stating. That's where that creed came. So then you have the Middle Ages. That's the trunk. That's the longest period. That's from right about 400, which is Augustine, right after, I say early Jerome, who translated the Bible into Latin and created the Latin Vulgate. That's 400. Jerome is, Augustine's 400. St. Patrick is just right after that in the Celtic. So that's the Middle Ages, okay? Then, what pops out of the Middle Ages first? The Renaissance. And then that goes up into the Reformation. In the North, you have the Reformation, Protestant Reformation. In the South, you have the Renaissance. Suddenly, because during that Middle Ages, most people are illiterate. That means they don't know how to read or write. They don't have Bibles. Everything is hand copied. You might have a little bit of a scripture, and if you had a Bible, it'd be chained to the pulpit. And you wouldn't even be able to read it unless you were educated and you could read Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. So people really were in darkness. They couldn't know for themselves. They had to believe whatever they were told. But once that Reformation came, and well, Renaissance is the beginning, and then the Reformation, you have Martin Luther translating the Bible into German, and he creates a German written language. And people suddenly, within 10 years, are reading and writing. The Gutenberg printing press had just been invented about 50 years before, Johann Gutenberg. They could print the Bible. And then William Tyndale, you know, he had been burned at the stake for translating the Bible into really readable English. But that Bible had been rescued by Cloverdale, and he had grabbed it and taken it down to Geneva, where Calvin was, and they published the Geneva Bible. But really, it was 80% done by William Tyndale. And that was taken back across the ocean to England. So you had suddenly reading and writing and education and people growing and coming. And Martin Luther, his belief was, he's called the Great Schoolman, arbitrary education for every child. And no matter how poor or how rich, it would not have a price on it. That was the main thing. Build a church, a school, and a hospital. And that was done later with missionary work, wherever the Bible went. But the reason I'm giving that background is because 15 to the early 16s, you have this Bible. Because, okay, Henry VIII, he died, but before he died, something really big happened. Because when William Tyndale was burned at the stake, it was because of Henry VIII. Because they said, no, you can't translate a Bible unless it's done through the Catholic Church at that time. And William Tyndale was working out of Oxford. He had a brilliant mind. He wanted to give the Bible. He said, I want the plowman, the poorest person, to have the Bible. I want the maid in the chamber to have a Bible. So when he was burned at the stake, his dying words were, God, open the eyes of the King of England. Well, that's Henry VIII. Well, within a couple of short period of time, Henry VIII, and I won't go into all the political, but he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. He ends up getting divorced. The church excommunicates him. He said, I'll be the head of the church. He becomes the head of the Church of England, and everything changes. And suddenly, the Bible is allowed. And that's why the Bible got back to England. And this is the Bible, the Geneva Bible is the Bible that the Pilgrims had when they went across the ocean in 1620. The King James Bible came a little bit, it was coming, but basically the Geneva Bible was the Bible of the Reformers. King James basically took the Geneva Bible and put his name on it. Not hardly anything was changed. They're basically the same Bible. But William Shakespeare, that's what I'm trying to get to. William Shakespeare had that Geneva Bible. And you can look this up. You can research it for yourself. He gives all credit to that Geneva Bible for his understanding, his inspiration, his brilliance, his ability to write these plays and these stories and these sonnets and these poems. And it's so beautiful. And the reason I wanted to say this is because my husband and I happened to see three movies. There were three movies in a row that were the William Shakespeare movies. Now, the first one was Henry V. No, the second one was Henry V. The first one was, well, let me go to the last one. The last one was Romeo and Juliet. That's the one I want to talk about. Romeo and Juliet, and it was in 1936. If you love Leslie Howard, he's the Scarlet Pimpernel. He also is in Gone with the Wind, but he's one of my favorites. He is Romeo. And it is the most beautiful. It's black and white, but the costumes, I don't believe they could even do this today because everything is handmade, hand done. Nothing is digital. It's the real thing. And it is so beautiful, the poetry and the speeches. And I just absolutely, really, finally, it's hard to understand Shakespeare, very hard it's very difficult to just pick up Shakespeare and read him unless you are in a class, unless you have a version that has been edited to have our language in it. And there is a very good version that was done for children back in the Victorian era, and it was done by Charles and Mary Lamb. And I have that upstairs, and that helped me with a lot of the plays that I was not familiar with. In my high school, we did Macbeth, and I had a wonderful English teacher for that. Miss Rose, her name was Lily Rose, and she was Irish, and she was strict. And we literally read Macbeth every day. We'd go around the room, and we would take turns reading the entire play, and she would explain it. And it's the best method, really. However, when the next grade I had Julius Caesar, my teacher, she was a little bit overwhelmed. She was a little tiny teacher, and the class was full of these high school boys, football players and everything, and you know how they are. And she had no control of the class. And she would just put a movie on, and you couldn't hear it, you couldn't understand it. It was in English accents. And that was my experience with Julius Caesar until later when I saw it on other occasions where it's a tremendous play also. And Shakespeare, wow, talk about vocabulary, talk about complex. And I know what the other one was the other night was Hamlet. It was Henry V, Hamlet, and Romeo and Juliet. They were showing different versions of Shakespeare and that had been done in movies. And this Romeo and Juliet was beautiful. But back to George Washington. Okay, so how do you get George Washington? We have the Renaissance, then we have the Protestant Reformation, and then we have the Bible, and then we have William Shakespeare, and then we have the 1600s. That's the Puritan era. 40 years, more literature is written in 40 years than before or since. They're called the Puritan Divines. That's where you have Milton's Paradise Lost, John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, these great epic books. People have only had the Bible for 100 years when this is going on. And then why would this group of pilgrims go across the ocean on in the size of a bathtub boat, uncharted waters? Freedom to worship. It meant so much. Freedom to worship. They carried their Bible. It is said in every colonial home was a Bible, Fox's Book of Martyrs, John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. They were an educated people. Everyone practically in America could read and write, even farmers and people that didn't have schools. They had their church, they had services, they had their Bible, they had their hymns. They were literate people, a very deep thinking people. You can see this through many of the writings, and especially during American Revolution, when people start writing tracts, kind of like it would be like Twitter today or X, where everyone felt compelled to give their opinion on the American Revolution, and there's thousands of tracts. Many people never will read because they're archived somewhere, and only a few emerge. People can't read them all, but it was very big, prolific amount of literacy. So then you have George Washington being raised in this. And if you look at the books they had in New England, the New England Primer, which was done by Webster, and it's the most beautiful book. I have a copy upstairs in my library. Everything was character and based on the Bible. You know, it starts with the Ten Commandments. The first 4 are vertical, like the cross. It's how you relate to God. No other gods before you. Thou shalt not bow down to any graven image. You know, and the first 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Then the last 6 are vertical, our relationship with our fellow man. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, da-da-da-da. So that's just 10. God made it simple. Fast forward to the New Testament, Jesus gives the Sermon on the Mount. And then when he's all done, that's 3 chapters. You know, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see God. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are you, and men shall revile you and say all manner of you. All those blessings. That's the Sermon on the Mount. Beautiful, but really high level of character, right? And then they said, well, how can we do this? And Jesus said, I can sum up the whole law in 2 sentences. And it's really a takeoff that 10 commandments, vertical. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy mind, all thy strength. That's the upper cross. This way, horizontal, and thy neighbor as thyself. That's what George Washington was raised on. That's what Abraham Lincoln was raised on. Unselfish, putting others first, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Kindness, honesty, goodness, perseverance, faithfulness, duty. And this went all the way into the American schools for many years, because I went to a high school in Tacoma called Lincoln High School, and you can go there today. And up on, it was actually modeled after they had gone around the world, the people that were going to design it, and what could we model it? And they actually modeled it after Eton, the famous boys' school in England. And it's a really beautiful school, and they've restored it. They didn't tear it down. So grateful. We were the Lincoln Abes. Well, that high school, and it was built, I believe, in about 1910, 1913. Above each door was a character word. One is justice. One was goodness. One was faithfulness. And then I have a little desk going down to the littlest. When they were selling the old black wrought iron desks, the little ones that have the design with the oak, from the grade school I had gone to and my father went to, Roosevelt in Tacoma, my mother bought 3 or 4 of these desks. And I still have 2. And on the littlest one, it would be the kindergarten level. So beautiful. It has the design of wheat. And on the one side it says kindness. And on the other side it says be true. That was the goal of education. To be good. To do what was right. To learn skills so you could help your fellow man. Develop character so you could be strong and fulfill your duty. Nothing has changed. God never changes. It's the same goal today. And I just thought, let's think about George Washington. And if you start reading about him, next time I will bring a little book. It's called His Rules of Order. And as a young boy, you can look this up. He copied these rules and wanted to make them his rules. And they are just filled with gold. They're just filled with jewels of beauty. So I want to say we can be very proud as Americans that we had a first president, George Washington, that was so admired around the world. People would say, next to Christ, George Washington is the most perfect man. That was how admired he was. He could have become a king. He said, I don't want to be a king. I really want to go back to Mount Vernon and take care of my land and my horses. But they said, oh no, you must be our leader. And so he was the leader. And it is said that every day he would disappear at 7, I believe it was 7 in the morning. He would close his door and say, do not disturb. And he had his time of prayer and quiet reflection and meditation and probably reading scripture. And then at 7 at night, he did it again. There are secrets to greatness. One must take time to develop one's soul, the eternal part of us. It is our responsibility. We're not victims, and we are given many tools, and the Bible is the #1 tool. So I encourage all of you, study a little more about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and read the books that were written in the past, because they are perhaps more true to sometimes modern interpretation. People take license. I like the old books. I like the reproduction old books. Well, thank you so much. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. Please push the notification bell and the like button. If you liked it, I appreciate that. And any comments, and share with your friends, because the Tea Talk, we want to welcome everyone. And we are in a special, the most fascinating, interesting time in history. And it's time to study our history. Thank you so much, and have a great week, and God bless.